yeah, look, it was like drinking from a fire hose, right? Fun, super stimulating, right? But also, tired. I was tired. Probably never more tired than when I had that job.
Welcome to the Optimize podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to kick off Series 4 with our new host, Chris Hamm. Chris is the CEO of Fin Acquisitions and former senior executive at GSA's Assisted Acquisition Services, where he oversaw $75 billion in contracts. Now he's bringing that insight to the podcast, exploring the strategies and future of federal contracting. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Chris on this episode.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Optimize podcast. I am Chris Hamm. I am your Series 4 host for the next couple of episodes. So we'll be going to talk to leaders in GovCon, and this is going to be my first Optimize podcast by VisibleThread. So bear with me here as I get down my my podcast mic and my questions. Fortunately, you'll be hearing mostly from the guests, and we're going to start out with probably the high profile name, former FAS commissioner. Alan Thomas, somebody that I've worked with many times. We're gonna discuss the leadership challenges, leadership in a crisis, change management, the way that the federal GovCon's world works, and then we will do some rapid fire questions. So with that, Alan, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be part of the shakedown cruise, as they say in the Navy, right? So we'll see what needs fixing on the ship after I'm done here.
Yeah, yeah. No soft openings. We're just doing it.
Yeah, I like that. Right, go right to sea. Got a mission, go get it.
All right, so let's start out here with how do we know each other? What's your background? How did you end up in the big chair a couple of years ago?
Yeah, so well, you and I, we definitely met before I got to GSA, right, back in 2017. But as you said, we had a chance to work closely there when I ran the acquisition service, and you ran the FedSyn team. One of the best brands, I think, in GSA, right, or a very recognizable brand among industry and folks in government. Yeah, so I had kind of this varied career. I mean, I'm not like the most patient person in the world, right? So I definitely was never somebody who's going to like go somewhere and stay for 25 years. So I was kind of in and out of government a couple times, and then in industry, but always around acquisition, procurement, right? On the public sector side, did some work like in product companies, did some work in services companies. And I had a stint, like a couple year stint at Booz Allen. And while I was there, I worked on a big project at GSA. It was a merger, right? It's combining the old Federal Supply Service and Federal Technology Service to create the Federal Acquisition Service. Little did I know then that I might cross paths with that again at some point in my career. And while I was there, I obviously met a bunch of executives at GSA, including a woman named Emily Murphy, who at that time at the Bush administration was the chief acquisition officer. And so, long story short, right, things came back around, and Emily obviously ended up as the administrator, right, had the lead role at GSA, and she was working on the transition team there, staffing some roles, and I had made contact with her, and she asked if you're interested in potentially coming into that administration, and I said sure. What are the roles? And we talked about a few things. I interviewed for the FAS role. That was, I thought, the most interesting to me, and got the job. And it was great, right? I mean, for me, it was kind of a nice bringing together of my industry experience and my government experience, right? So I could walk in and say like, hey, I've been, an Alliance small business, right? So I know what it's like to deal with GSA from that standpoint. I've been in government and used GSA solutions, used the schedules, used the GWACs, right, to satisfy requirements I had as a program manager in government, and then I'd obviously been a consultant and kind of been on the inside a little bit of GSA. So that was I think I came with a relatively good perspective, but like any job, it's like, hey, half of what you need to know going in, and the other half you gotta figure out once you get there.
So if memory serves me right, you were the first political appointee in that job. Previous to that, it was a career job, right?
That is correct. That's right. Yeah, I was the first political appointee in that role. Yeah, the team that came in there made that change. I think they felt, that's kind of a key, right? There are a few key roles that report to the administrator, right, at GSA, right? There's the person who runs the Federal Acquisition Service. There's the person who runs the Public Building Service. There's obviously the deputy, right? You choose. I think, from when that new team came in, I think they felt like, hey, they wanted to have some control over who were the, three or four people that are in those key kind of direct report sort of roles. So they did make the change on the FAS side to make it a political appointee.
So that job, one of the lesser known jobs, I think, in like people who don't think about how the government works, in terms of like dollar amount and span of control. So showing up into like the world's largest buyer, what was like the first couple of weeks like?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was the first person in the like Emily hadn't been confirmed yet, so she was a senior advisor, right? But there was an acting administrator. It was actually a fellow named Tim Horn, who probably know Tim, who was great to work with. And the PBS, the building service commissioner, Dan Matthews, didn't come on board, I think, until August or something. And I showed up in June. So for a while, I was kind of like the only kind of, political person in there actually in the chair, right? Um, yeah, look, it was like drinking from a fire hose, right? Because, as I said, hey, about half the job when you get in. So I was familiar with schedules and GWACs and that sort of thing. But FAS it's a really big and diverse portfolio. I mean, there's the fleet program, right, where you're managing a couple 100,000 vehicles on behalf of the federal government. There's the government-wide credit card program. There's a number of interesting things going on in the travel space. They run the U.S. Access program, which for a chunk of the civilian agencies does identity and access management. So there's all these, and there's the big telecom contract, right? The old ETS contract. It's like, and those in and of themselves are substantial businesses with different kinds of financials, different kinds of incentives, and different connections out to agencies. So for me, like a little the first layer about each of those things when you're outside government, or outside the organization. But once you get inside, there was a huge amount to learn there on kind of some of those big individual initiatives. I will say one area of comfort for me was, I remember the first briefing I got from the CFO, a guy named Gerard Bedard at the time. And there's a lot of numbers, right? Lot to take in. And we got to this, I forget what they called it, right? They didn't call it an income statement. But when I looked at it, I said, that looks like an income statement for a business. And Gerard, who'd been in the private sector, said, yes, it is actually. Like, don't worry about, we've like changed the name slightly, but basically what you're looking at is the P&L, right, for your entire organization. I was like, okay. I know how to read that and evaluate that. So once we did like a little bit of translation on, well, when we say, net operating revenue, right, you should actually think of it as, this. It was like, okay. Then to that was like, I remember initially feeling a little bit of comfort in that. It's like, ooh, I have something that I could kind of ground my view of the organization in, right? That was a little bit familiar. But, there's all that learning, and then there's all people, right? There's all kinds of people who you haven't worked with before, you just have known a little bit, who now they report to you in some way, shape, or form. So like just it was a fire hose those first couple months. I don't think I left. I mean, I can literally, my family was at the beach basically for the summer, right? And it actually worked out for me because I didn't leave. I never left before like 8:00, right? It just felt like every night you just like there's always more you could read or take in or do. Fun, super stimulating, right? But also, I was tired, probably never more tired than when I had that job.
Okay, so let me turn it now from the discovery phase, like, what is this job? What am I going to do? To the leadership and like setting direction phase. So how long did it take you to go from like, all right, I kind of get it now. I get the finances, but when I was on the outside, I always wondered why don't they do it this way? Like I have an idea and getting people on board and like, this is the path we're going to follow.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It was so there were a couple things. There was a near-term challenge there, right? There was a group, the Technology Transformation Services team, right, which was in the Obama administration kind of set up as its own, as a separate service, kind of a third service, right? The vision in the first Trump administration was, hey, we're going to bring that going to merge that, if you will, into the Federal Acquisition Service. So there was a near-term kind of issue there, right, in terms of how do we do that and do it. And there was some kind of distrust between the people and the leaders in that organization and legacy FAS, right? And so there was some things we had to do to kind of repair that relationship and then figure out how to kind of bring that team in, right? So that was an initial focus. And we actually did that largely on our own. We created a set of kind of IPTs or working teams. We called it joining forces. And we thought carefully about kind of how to bring that team in, knit them in as part of the FAS family, but also give them a little bit of independence and allow them to do some things that made them unique and kind of valuable to the customer set that they serve. So that was one. The second one was, all the execs in FAS, because there is a little bit of a financial component to it, are I found are pretty responsive to kind of goal setting, and you could actually think about some concrete objectives that you could give people. And so I remember reading through the SES plans that everyone had, right? Their performance plans, and previously there had been people had 15 to 20 goals or objectives for the year, right? And many of them were kind of in what I would call input based goals. Hold these meetings, to kind of do these things, right? But not outcome focused. And so I really made an effort to, with each of my direct reports, and I think that kind of trickled down right in the organization. Hey, let's pick maybe 5 things that are going to be objectives for the year. They're going to be outcome based, and a couple of them are going to be shared objectives, right? So things that we could try that even in an enterprise as diverse as the Federal Acquisition Service, we could try to create some common threads across the executives, right? So get people thinking not just about your area, but also about how your area contributes overall to the enterprise. And I think that was reasonably successful. I mean, I will tell you, most executives breathed a sigh of relief when they were like, well, good, I'm happy to get rid of the 18 objectives I have in here and just focus on a few core things. Now, the outcomes piece is, so you have to kind of own that, right? Because you don't always have 100% control. If you tell me to hold 4 meetings during the year, right, I can hold 4 meetings. I have 100% control over that, right? The outcome, an outcome-based metric, you might have some control, but not full control. So there was a little bit of, I think, getting comfortable with, hey, there may be things outside your control that prevent you from meeting this. But overall, I think people were receptive to the idea of fewer goals, outcome-based, and then some shared things that tried to kind of knit or stitch people together.
So I was on the receiving side of that. Things that I could say now, I didn't say then. That's outside of my control. We had meetings. We had our own little side conversations. Like one of them was like our socioeconomic goals.
Yeah.
My program was never, ever, ever going to make that number. It just, like how much money was I going to be able to do? But I can tell you, it did lead me to change the nature of my internal support contracts to help make the socioeconomic goals over the course of 2 years. So it worked. But then like the grumbling of, the new political appointee wants us to shift from left to right, and we're gonna, or whatever the design is. Because like the careerists, I was there for 25 years, and
Sure.
the whiplash of back and forth does. We like, all right, do we trust him, or are we gonna wait him out? Like, what's the nature of is this a 1-year job hop, and then I got to do something different around category management? So like, how do you win over me? Like, how do you is how do you get the convince me that I'm like this is the path that we're gonna do it?
Yeah, well, and that is interesting, right? Because people, you're right. People say, "Hey, at most you might be here 4 years, right?" And most people, well, most politicals don't stay. I stayed 2.5 years, right? So like, hey, most people don't stay, that long, right? So I always thought it was important to say there are, hey, I'm going to give you a few objectives. They're going to tie into my few objectives, right? So just like we're not going to try and do you can't do everything, right? You can't get to everything, right? You sort of have maybe 3 big things you want to do, try and accomplish maybe 2 of them while you're there, and put the third one in motion, right? That probably is success, I think, for if you're in a political role where you have a clock, right? And then it's not going to be forever. In terms of like connecting with the people, I mean, we would do a quarterly. I learned the group did a quarterly offset, right? And I was like, oh, I always found that very valuable, not just for kind of the formal component of it, but also all the stuff that I call like the creases in the meetings and the days, right? Where people, there's side conversations and people go to dinner afterwards, or they go, they get a glass of wine, whatever, right? Like all of that for me was incredibly value in building relationships with people, trying to do it, relatively quickly. And then, kind of get everybody focused on, again, just a few goals. And then, coming back to those things, right? Staying consistent. I think being accessible was part of that. I mean, I know this was back in the day when everyone's was in the office. I know folks are returning to the office now, but I'm a big believer in a kind of management by walking around, right? So, hey, drop in on different parts of the organization at, different times of the day, just to see kind of what's going on, what are people up to, what's on people's minds. I mean, to me, that has impact beyond just that individual conversation, right? That probably gets repeated, 10 times, right, across the business. And if you do it enough, it has, I think it has kind of the desired effect. And then I would say just making sure that people can see, hey, are you in alignment with your boss, right? So like, hey, Emily ran the organization. All right, she's got some big priorities. We're going to make sure that what we're doing is in alignment with those priorities, right? I think if people see alignment, progress, and consistency on a few objectives, they generally move along with you, right? If you're not asking them to do anything crazy, right? They'll go. Yeah, that was kind of the formula there, right? Nothing fancy, right? Just be open, transparent, pretty straightforward.
So let me ask you, during your run, what was the biggest challenge? What was like oh man, like I don't know anything about the excess program and I have a congressional hearing on it, or like what's the like out of nowhere, and now you've got to like drop everything and just fix it.
Well, it's so funny you mentioned hearing, right? Because I did 12 days in, right? I got called for 12 business days in, or I got called up for a hearing. It turned out to be not. It was that was not a man. I would say the things that were like the stuff you didn't know about, I feel like you could overcome, just by studying, right? Getting up to speed. I think initially the biggest challenge was that I mentioned there was the technology transformation service, the 18F team, right? All that, merging that into the Federal Acquisition Service, right, was initially the very biggest challenge, because there were IG reports, and there was some sort of personal bad blood, some things that had happened kind of at the end of the Obama administration and the transition, right, that made it a little bit of a volatile kind of situation, right? And there was a political appointee. There was who ran the TTS, who had been appointed under the Obama administration in September, October, before the election, right? And so, there was distrust definitely between that team and the kind of the broader FAS team, right? So I think overcoming that, figuring out how to bring that organization in again, make it part of FAS, but also don't squash it, right? So that some of the things that made it good and unique, they could retain. That was initially the biggest challenge, right? And we ended up making a leadership change at the very top of that organization. But there were a number of people in that group who I think were actually kind of looking for a little bit of home and a little bit of guidance and a little bit of structure that maybe they didn't have. And I think we were able to bring them into FAS, and put a little structure around the organization. There were a few, I would say, kind of second level leaders in that organization who bought into it after a little bit of initial skepticism. and that that went a long way, right, to making that go smoothly. Could have been messy, but it didn't end up being messy, right? There didn't end up being a bunch of IG reports or a bunch of whistleblower complaints or any of that kind of stuff, right? Like it went overall, it went pretty smoothly, which you may not have predicted that at the beginning of that process.
So you've said the word trust a few times. Inherently in leadership is, and like building trust with the team. You mentioned about like the establishing quarterly meetings, offsites, leadership council, like establishing a relationship and rapport with folks. So previous to that, to your time at FAS, where did you pick that up? How did you like build the skill to like, get past the initial awkwardness of like, hi, I'm Alan, and like actually connect? Because that's like that's like the business developer's like main thing. How do they get them to actually care about me, listen to me, and like believe that it's like I'm aligned with their interests?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think a couple areas. I mean, I've been a team sports person all my life, right? Either played or coached team sports. So for me, I kind of look at it. I look at managing people through that prism to some extent, right? And I think if you've played team sports, it's not the only way to kind of build that skill or build that muscle, but it is certainly one way, right? Where you have a group of people that come together for a certain period of time with a shared objective. And people, you oftentimes have to figure out roles, right? I was a basketball guy, right? So it's like, hey, one ball, five people, not everyone's probably going to be a 20-point scorer on the team, right? So you got to kind of come together, get people comfortable with each other, figure out roles, right? And then play those roles and have the team generate some success and really get focused on, if you're playing a team sport, the most fun thing is to be part of a successful team, right? A winning team at the end of the day. And whatever your role is in that, most people, if they've got a defined role, they're playing it well, and the group is having success, they're going to be happy, even if they're not the big scorer or the star of the group, right? So for me, one team sports was definitely one kind of one way I think I built some kind of skill there. The other one I would say is I did have kind of early in my career, I just fell into a sales role, right? I had gone to business school. I'd left the government in the late 90s, had gone to business school. And when I halfway through business school in the summer, I joined this startup, this business to business startup in the e-commerce space. And they had a good commercial offering. They were growing rapidly. They wanted to try and grow in government and federal. And they were like, hey, you used to work in the federal government. We'll teach you sort of how to sell things and, develop business. You kind of teach us about government. So I said, great. And that, for me, that was really, that was like being thrown into kind of a lab situation, right? Where, they had, my territory was the whole federal government, right? And the VP of sales kind of took me under his wing. And, we spent probably 18 months just doing an unbelievable number of meetings and events. And I think there really, I really got, you just learn to get thrown, like you're thrown into a bunch of different situations where you got to connect with all kinds of different people, right? And do it relatively quickly. And for me, that was a great experience, right? I mean, I think I've always kind of taken that ability to kind of get dropped into a situation where you don't know a lot of people in the room and quickly try and build some rapport and some credibility and figure out what matters to them and what you have that might help them achieve their objectives and being in selling situations like that, you kind of either sink or swim on those sort of things, right? So that for me also was kind of a foundational experience that happened relatively early in my career.
All right, so let's move now towards more current events, the world as it is in 2025 versus the way that it was in 2016.
Do we have
So
to?
yeah,
Okay, all
y-
right.
there's some relevance here. So GSA's direction has certainly gained more prominence. The nature of vehicles, the nature of the FAR rewrite, the like the the way in which contracts are being done. So, in terms of, the short-term world of government contracting, what do you see in the near term in terms of like what's the direction, and then what's any advice you would give out there for like how do you just live in the next in the sudden hard right turn in the last 8 months, and then what's the next year look like?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that changes to the changes to the rules of the game, right? All the changes that have happened in the FAR and the speed with which they've happened, I think are, it's probably one of the headline stories in federal procurement, right? I think the centralization of some of the for common goods and services within GSA is kind of another headline. But if I think about how the kind of rules of the game have changed, I think for me the biggest question still is, and I know that team at GSA and OFPP is thinking hard about this, and I think doing a lot of the right things to try and make sure that these changes get institutionalized. But how does this actually play out, right? Because the sort of headline on all the changes in the system is, hey, we want more speed and a focus on outcomes, right? More flexibility. So we're going to give individual contracting officers and contracting personnel, program teams, a lot more flexibility, a lot more discretion, right? We're going to remove a lot of the things that aren't mandatory in law, and create some guides and things like that, give people a lot of discretion, which I have no argument with. That sounds great, right? I think in order to get those people, those GS 12s through 15s out in the field, right, to actually use that discretion and creativity that you're giving them, I think you need to create the right kind of environment that makes them comfortable doing that. And I'm not sure that the current environment is aligned, right, with saying to the average GS 13, hey, you just got a bunch more freedom to get real creative in how you cut deals between the government and industry, right, to achieve the objectives of the program team that you're serving. So uh that's to me that's the biggest question, right? Is like you've changed a bunch of the rules to create a certain set of outcomes. Are you going to get enough uptake from the workforce to actually use all that flexibility that you've given them to generate the kind of outcomes that you want to see? Again, I think they're thinking about, I've heard about, hey, we're going to training and FAI and in DAU and the guidebooks and things, right? So people just sort of don't show up with a blank sheet of paper on how to do some of these things. But to me, it's a little bit deeper than that. We talked about trust in the last segment,
Yeah.
right? It's like, hey, does the average GS 13 trust that if they go do something a little bit creative and different and it doesn't work out, right, but it's a good faith effort on their part, are they good, right? Does the chain have their back, or does somebody get whacked, right, because they tried something a little bit different and it didn't work, right? That to me, that's an open question, right? And I think the next 12 to 18 months is going to be real interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I brought you one of the craziest ideas that I've ever had. You carried the water. Then our upper boss said halfway. I got halfway
Yeah,
on a very large drone program.
yeah, yeah.
Today, I don't bring that program. Today, my head's down. So like you could give me all the creativity, all the authority in the world, but if I don't feel like you believe in the workforce, I'm not. You're not getting my discretionary creativity. You're getting my compliance. You're getting my like paper. Do the stuff.
Yep. No, I think that's a great example. Yeah, I think, my fear, right, is that people will have all this additional discretion, but they'll sort of like, hey, I'd love to be like the third person to do this, right? Because I want to see a couple other people go, right, and see how it goes for them, right? And so, yeah, that again, that's it's a softer, more subtle component of leading an organization, right? But it's creating the right sort of climate where people feel comfortable doing those things that you've said they're empowered to do, right? I'm not sure. I don't know we're there yet in the macro, kind of a macro perspective in the federal government. There probably are pockets of that, and hopefully those pockets spread. But that that if you want to get the goodness that's coming out of all that change that you've driven in policy, you need to get people comfortable using it, right? And so there are ways to get there. I'm hopeful that it will happen, right? But we'll see. I do think it's an open question, right? In terms of what does it look like in 12 to 18 months, right? Are they look, you said, hey, what would you tell government contractors? I say to government contractors, you should be prepared to walk in and talk to both your program customer and your contracting customer about those changes, about the flexibilities, and about any examples you have of other people that have done it in government, right? To get those two constituencies, the program team and the contract team, as comfortable as you can with some of these different sort of ideas that are percolating right out in the federal procurement world right now, right? You can't just walk in and know about your stuff anymore, right? Like you got to walk in and know about the process and other examples where it's been done to create some of that comfort level. So that, for me, that's like one big piece of advice. You got to educate your program teams and your BD teams about those things, right? Do not assume the customer has all that information. You should assume they don't, right? That they don't have any of it.
And one of the tough parts right now, so I mean, there has been a government shutdown. The travel programs for everybody, the cards have been cut down to zero. Conferences and events and general interactions are probably at an all-time low. Like the ability for company X to talk to agency Y. If there's been a harder time, I'm not sure. Like it's one of those windows. Yeah. Are there any other ways that like you're seeing that are being effective?
I would say, I think you're right. Although when people do have conferences, things like that, the people who they're starved for it, right? I mean, you can tell like they're starved for the interaction. Like I think people being back in the office to a large extent is helpful, right? Because if you got program folks who have badges and who have access to spaces, right? There's more opportunity to run into people, to have hallway conversations. My sense is, and this is largely GSA based, right? But when people are back in the office, they are, for whatever reason, they're more willing to meet face to face, right? Hey, let's go down and get coffee. Let's get lunch, right? I do think there's been a little bit of an uptick in that as people have gotten called back into the office. I don't know if there's any magic formula for it, right? I mean, I think it's sort of just like it's always been, right? Where you've got to, you got to reach out to people, and when they're in, the default. I mean, just think about this too, Chris, right? The default used to be pre-COVID, right? The default was, hey, if we're gonna meet, we're gonna meet in person, right? Like that's just how this is gonna happen, right? And I think over COVID, obviously, default became, hey, let's meet on video. And for some parts, some organizations that I would hear vendors say it's hard to get the contracting officer on the phone or on video, right? Like I never able to connect with them. So I think as people come back into the office, it's a little maybe a little bit easier to generate some of that face-to-face interaction. Yeah, I wish I had a magic bullet there, but I don't. I don't know. You have any magic bullets?
I got an idea right now. Let's buy all the coffee shops right outside of every federal building. What when you're at the airport and it says like it's NBC, and whatever. Like Fin Acquisitions or your company is now the coffee shop where we have collaboration sessions. It's like the like DIU, but for every agency.
I like it. Yeah, I like I like it. I like it a lot. I like it a lot. Well, we joke. I mean, this is not the inside baseball and GSA, but there's that coffee shop, Greenberries, that's like literally connected to the building, right? It's like it's another conference room, really, at the GSA headquarters, right? You could just go hang out in the Greenberries all day and see who shows up, right? You probably meet half dozen people you want to talk to over the course of the day.
Yeah, sponsored by VisibleThread and Greenberries now.
There you go. I like it.
All right. Well, we're covered the topics. Now we're on the winding down part of it. What are you doing now, Alan? You're gonna go play basketball after this? What are you doing?
I play with a group on Tuesday nights, a group of old men, and it takes me an entire week to recover. I can only play once a week now. It's like my body can't take it. No hoops. I'm on my own as an independent consultant and advisor. I've been doing that, gosh, almost 2 years now. I'm doing business as AlphaTango Strategies, but it's just me. Yeah, and I have a book of clients who are obviously all interested in some way, shape, or form in doing work with the federal government. Got some traditional GovCon players, got some new entrants in the market, right? I will say all this change. One thing I have noticed, all the change that's happening in government and the acquisition system. We could debate the merits of some of the individual changes. It has piqued interest among companies who maybe would not have considered doing business with the government before, right? Like it has, government, I think, has become something that's on the radar of, some Silicon Valley firms and startups and things like that. Whereas before they might have said, that feels too hard, or it's sort of a niche or whatever. I am sensing, that a lot of people, it's a bullet they have where they're like, we need to look into that a little bit more, right? Because there might be something there for this. So that if you want to broaden the industrial base and kind of get access to the best minds out there, I think that's a good thing. So yeah, on my own as an independent consultant and advisor.
So I mean, there are barriers to entry. You've probably done the same thing I have. You had to figure out how to register in SAM. You had to figure out what a cage code is. You've had to, decide, do I need to have FedRAMP?
Yeah, no, that's true, right? I mean, those barriers are definitely still there, mostly overcomable though, right? I think, the main thing is getting people interested in the problem set that government has, right? And then, making sure that they can have access to those opportunities. Look, some of the changes they've made in the FAR, right, are encouraging people, right, to do things in a little more non-traditional way, are encouraging, I think, some of these companies to come in and take a look at the market and, think about trying to shape some opportunities where they might be able to bring their technology or their service into the government. So anyways, overall, I think, that's a good thing, right? Anytime you broaden the market, I think it's generally good.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up podcast number 1 for series 4 of the Optimized podcast by VisibleThread. Alan, thank you for being on. And you have any parting thoughts for us?
Chris. Thanks for having me. Yeah. I would say when sort of all the Doge changes were happening and everything, right? It's like, people are like, what do you, like, how should we get through this? I was like, hey, sometimes you have to turn to country music for inspiration, right? And I would say, there's a good country song by Gary Allan called "Every Storm Runs Out of Rain," right? And I think, if you thought the world was falling in February because of the Doge, right? Hey, you've seen that rain, kind of end a little bit. There are other challenges out there. There always will be, right? But, I would say if you just kind of stick with it, right? Stay focused kind of on the end game, on your goal. Don't get too distracted by some of the noise that's out there. We've been through a bit of a noisy period. You probably come through it all okay. Every storm does indeed run out of rain.
I think you just gave us the headline clip for the podcast.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimized podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host Chris Hamm and our guest, Alan Thomas. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimized podcast.